Okay. All right. You should be able to hear me now. I was trying to use a fancy camera, a fancy microphone, but for some reason it wasn't plugged in. I'm going to leave it here though. Apparently you can hear me. People are saying, "Yay!" Right. I'm going to leave the fancy looking microphone here though, because that way it looks like I'm posh and I'm using a fancy microphone when actually it's just my MacBook. So welcome to the stream. Welcome to the show. My name is Marc Burrows. I am a author now. I can officially say that, and a musician and a comedian. And I've written this book about the life of Terry Pratchett, my favourite author of all time. It's out on July the 30th. Not many people have read it yet, but it is finished, which is really exciting. The locked down copy got finished a week ago, I think. I spent the week before that doing the index because I can't afford to pay anyone to do that for me. So I've done, it's all done, which is really exciting. People are logging on, people are saying hi. You should be able to see me on either Facebook or on YouTube or on Instagram, I think. Are we on Instagram? We're on Instagram. Yes. Technology. It's all working. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read a bit of the book. I'm going to read you the first chapter, probably the whole chapter, depending on how long it lasts. And we'll see how that goes. And then afterwards, I am going to talk a little bit about how the book was put together, how that chapter was put together, where certain information from that chapter came from, and then we'll do some Q&A, do a bit of general larking about. I'm very grateful for you joining me, by the way. I hope you appreciate I put a shirt on for you. I put a tie on for you. I'm actually wearing jeans. This is the first time in 3 weeks I've worn jeans, actual proper trousers. Absolutely ridiculous. But so yes, I'm here. We're all here. I know some people seem to be watching. Should we get on with it and read some of the book? My friend Nathaniel is telling me to take my pants off.
Take them off.
I will not be taking my pants off. No, Nathaniel's American, but I think he knows. I think he knows what we mean by pants. I'm also going to be favouring this side of my head because I think my hair looks better from this side. I'm just going to say that. Right. I reckon we have wasted enough time, and anyone who's coming is coming. So, oh, my mum's watching. Hi, Mum.
Herringham Pottery says, trousers, you really push the boat out.
Yep, trousers, I really push the boat out. Absolutely true. I know, I haven't... The most astonishing thing isn't the fact that I'm wearing jeans. The most astonishing thing is the fact that the jeans I'm wearing still fit after what I've been eating and doing for the night for the last, 3, 4... hang on, how long have we been in lockdown now? I've been working from home since the 3rd of March. So yeah, it's pretty extraordinary whatsoever. So yeah, I'm going to give this a tiny bit longer just for people to log in. So I'll tell you a bit about my history with Terry Pratchett. I first read a Discworld novel in 1992, I believe, when I was 11 years old. My mum and dad got lent Guards and The Colour of Magic. They both loved them. I was already a massive nerd. I already had a reading age slightly creepily above what I should have been, and they thought that watching and reading ridiculously funny fantasy novels would be something I'd be interested in. I was completely hooked. I love both of them. The fact that The Colour of Magic starts with the stupidest pun in the history of Discworld, and then very quickly goes on to call all gods bastards, and it's like that. I was completely in love with it. And then Vimes calling the city a bitch in the first few paragraphs of Guards completely sucking me in. But I've been reading Terry Pratchett since the early 90s. You can see my books behind me. Most of those were bought the week they came out, apart from the one I'm pointing to literally now, which is a early edition version of The Colour of Magic, which I tracked down. Right, I reckon we've wasted enough time and we can do reading. Somebody's saying play the bass to do this to music. I cannot for the life of me read this out and play the bass at the same time. Sorry. And Teresa has said, so long as you don't end up down the wrong side of the Trousers of Time. I should have done a Trousers of Time joke. Okay, don't worry. There are actually plenty of Trousers of Time references in the book. In fact, at one point there is a reference to the bifurcated pantaloons of destiny, which is my favourite sentence I've ever written. Some more Pratchett chat coming up. Mort is my favourite. Mort is an excellent Terry Pratchett opener. If you've never read a Pratchett book before, Mort is a really good first one. Terry thought that was the first book where he really had got a handle on what he was doing. He described it as discovering the joy of plot. I actually think that's a little bit unfair on the two that preceded it, because I think there's a really good plot in the like Fantastic and Equal Rights. But Mort is a really good, simple, straightforward one to start with. And Nathaniel saying that Pyramids was my intro to Pratchett. Pyramids is brilliant. The first 20 pages of Pyramids is such a good bit of writing, which intercuts between this exciting chase across the rooftops of a city and flashbacks to a flagrant ripoff of a Victorian school novel. It's a really good bit of writing. Right. I reckon we have left this long enough and we have got to the point where I can do some reading. So, welcome everybody. Here's what we're doing. I'm going to read out the first chapter of the book, and then we're going to discuss the first chapter of the book. So, that in mind, let's go for it. So, I'm not going to read you the acknowledgements, the forward. The book's got a really amazing forward written by Helen O'Hara, who is one of my favourite ever arts journalists. More of a film reviewer, but I know she loves Pratchett, so I got her to write the forward. So we're not going to do the forward, we're not going to do the introduction, we're not going to do the acknowledgements. We are just going to dive straight in with chapter 1. So I think I'm going to read the whole chapter. If I'm going too fast, please tell me. We'll see where we go. So chapter 1. Let me just wet my whistle with good. Right. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. Let us begin as Terry might. See the universe, frosted with stars, streaked with the tails of comets. There are no turtles here, but it's still pretty impressive. Focus. Let a strange spherical world roll awkwardly into view like a badly hit snooker ball. It has continents and oceans and ice caps you'd swear are a little smaller than they were last time you looked. Focus. On a rain-soaked island, on the upper right-hand side of the ball, a smudge of green amid the steely blue, and focus. On the southeast of the island, find the biggest city, a sprawling, smoggy tangle of grey, and let your eye drift to the left and up a little bit to where there's a lot more green between the grey bits, and focus on a large village, or perhaps it's a small town, surrounded by woods and hills, and focus on a tiny library. Really just 2 rooms of books, not even very big rooms, but still a library, and focus on a boy, small for his age, attempting to wedge more books than he can possibly carry into a school satchel. This is Terence David John Pratchett, heading home to nearby 40 Green, where he will lose himself in words. It will take his feet only a few minutes to get him back, but the words are going to carry him, so much further. 40 Green in Buckinghamshire, England, shouldn't really exist anymore. It's one of those tiny hamlets that's been around for so long it stays on the map out of sheer force of habit. A census in 1881 listed just 10 houses there, and 70 years later that figure had just about doubled. Gradually, the town of Beaconsfield had swollen and swallowed it whole, along with neighbouring hamlets such as Knotty Green and Holtspur. 40 Green is where Beaconsfield ends, tagged onto the side of the town like a limpet clinging to a toy boat. Beyond its borders, there are miles and miles of wooded countryside full of rolling ponds, rolling hills, ponds, streams, and copses of trees. Terry Pratchett grew up with the Chiltern Hills as his back garden, a landscape perfect for the adventures of a young boy armed with a wild imagination and a bicycle. He had the Shire on his doorstep. Terry was born on the 28th of April 1948 in the Canellan nursing home Beaconsfield. His parents, David and Eileen, had married in nearby Amersham in 1942, but waited a while before having children. Their lives, as Terry would later tell the BBC Radio 4's Desert Island Discs, had been interrupted by the outbreak of the Second World War. David had been just 19 when war broke out and enlisted voluntarily in the Royal Air Force after turning 21. He spent the war stationed near Karachi in what was then British India and is now Pakistan. He returned to a post-war England of bomb sites, rationing, and young people quite desperate to make babies. However, unlike many of their generation who wasted absolutely no time in playing their part in the coming population boom, it would be a further 3 years before Eileen fell pregnant. Terry was in no hurry to enter the world either, arriving days later than his due date. The family were poor, though not alarmingly so. Both David and Eileen were in work during the whole of Terry's childhood. His father was a motor mechanic. There's a footnote here. I have put footnotes in the book. It's not a rip-off, it's homage. Footnote here. Many profiles of Pratchett have described his father with a rather grander word, engineer. While technically that is true, it doesn't really give an accurate impression. David Pratchett wasn't building steam engines or designing bridges. He was fixing cars, which is a skilled and important job in itself, and there's no need to dress it up as something it isn't. The world would struggle without motor mechanics. I live here because my dad's a mechanic.
Loving this reading, says Rocket.
Someone loves the reading. Excellent, good. Where I've lost my place now because I read a footnote. It's okay, it wasn't you, it was the footnote. There we go. His father was a motor mechanic and his mother a company secretary. They were perfectly suited to those jobs. David was a tinkerer. He loved to build things and rebuild them, messing about with radio equipment and a never-ending list of projects. Eileen, meanwhile, was practical and organised and loved words and stories. The family lived in a small cottage with no electricity that shared its one cold water tap with the house next door. Every other day, David would run a hose pipe from the shared tap and fill up a tank in the kitchen for the family's water needs. The house was lit by gas lamps and candles, and Eileen would buy the huge 90-volt ever-ready batteries that powered the family wireless. Bathroom needs were taken care of by an old Elson privy, essentially a seat over a septic tank contained in a shed, which had to be emptied by hand once a week to the benefit of the tomatoes at the bottom of the garden. If such a life sounds hard by modern standards, It's a life that sounds hard by modern standards. But in late 1940s Britain, such conditions were neither extreme nor unusual for a working-class family. Terry would say on many occasions that in those post-Blitz years, living close to London, you were grateful if you had a house at all. The Pratchetts were a fairly typical British family at the time. David and Eileen were attentive parents, though not outwardly affectionate. Their granddaughter Rihanna would later describe them in a 2018 piece she wrote for The Guardian as kind but matter-of-fact people and not given to outward displays of affection. That makes a great deal of sense when you read Pratchett's work. Honestly, how many Pratchett characters can you think of that would be comfortably described as a hugger? Instead, they expressed love through creativity and craft. David helped his son make carts and tree houses, and the two built their own shortwave radio sets, even joining the Chiltern Amateur Radio Club, where they used the handle Homebrew R1155. Much of Terry's pocket money would go on batteries, capacitors, and other electrical components. One of David's proudest moments was when his son rigged the garden shed using a magneto generator to give him an electric shock when he tried the handle. For her part, Eileen would sit down with Terry and encourage him to read and be creative. She was of Irish descent, though she'd grown up in London, and would tell her son stories and snatches of folklore passed on by her grandfather. She was a clever and knowledgeable woman, full of tidbits of trivia, with a wicked sense of humour, exemplified by the fact that she named the family tortoise Phidippides.
He says hi.
After the Greek hero who ran from Marathon to Athens. Terry was raised with a working definition of irony, plodding slowly around the back garden, eating lettuce. Eileen was always one to put a shine on a story, a habit she passed on to her son, who would often tweak his own anecdotes to make them more narratively satisfying. She was the loudest cheerleader when Terry eventually expressed an interest in becoming a writer, but writing and even reading were latecomers to Terry's world. Initially, his creativity manifested as a dreamy, curious, and introspective character. He would describe people in terms of colour, saying he liked them because they seemed purple or brown, descriptions that had nothing to do with their skin. His childhood was full of occasions where his imagination added an unusual spin and shape to the world, creating the possibilities and scenarios quite different from the mundane reality in front of him. He remembered walking through an old quarry on the way home from school and imagining odd prehistoric fish swimming in the walls and floor of the chalk pit, which, as a side note, is an image that turns up in the We Free Men. An old iron bed swimming in the walls and floor of a chalk pit as if underwater. An old iron bedstead at the bottom of the garden became a pirate ship, a flying saucer, or a castle as his imagination demanded. When he was 5 years old, his mother took him to Gamage's department store in London to meet Father Christmas. Awestruck by the shelves full of toys, lights, and glitter, he wandered off on his own. A panicked Eileen found him riding an escalator, lost in a dream world. To the young Terry, the store was an entire universe of possibility. The experience stayed with him and became the inspiration for his children's novel, Truckers. He later told an audience at a 2005 convention in Bloomington, Minnesota, that many of the ideas that became the Discworld had their roots in that day. Terry was raised in the Church of England. Hang on. Somebody just said 8 out of 10. Cheers. I'll take 8 out of 10. Thanks. Terry was raised in the Church of England system, but only because most people were. He attended a Church of England school, went to Sunday school in a tin-roofed tabernacle, and he told the Scotsman in 2012 that he suspected Sunday school was just an excuse for his parents to get some intimate alone time. And like his parents, he was eventually married in an Anglican church. Much later, he would tell the Telegraph that despite spending his career being openly critical of organised religion, he was fond of the Church of England because of how tied up it was with the English national character.
Hattie says this is such a great idea.
Oh, thanks, Hattie. Both of his parents practiced a fairly typical go-through-the-motions when we have to religious indifference, and faith of any kind barely factored in family life. When the local vicar called unexpectedly and saw a model Buddha that David Pratchett had brought back from his wartime travels, he declared it a pagan icon and was promptly thrown out of the house. Eileen had Catholicism somewhere in her background, but left almost all traces of it behind when a devout family member disapproved of her Anglican marriage and declared that her children would be bastards. Pratchett recounted the story during a 2013 appearance live at the House event at the Sydney Opera House, saying that, figuratively speaking, they turned out to be correct. The only nod to her papist roots in the Pratchett's home was an old crucifix, which she kept until her dying day. Terry had stumbled across it when he was about 6, and much to his mother's amusement, assumed that the lifelike Christ hanging from the cross was some sort of trapeze artist. Religion had barely factored in his life so little, he simply hadn't recognised the image. It would later surface in his science fiction novel Strata. Nevertheless, a basic Christian message did manage to penetrate as a type of Jesus light, as he told an audience during a talk at the Sydney Opera House in 2013. People know what Jesus said. Basically, Bill and Ted said it as well. Be excellent to each other. You don't need anything else. It's a good starting point. You don't need to go to church. You just need to accept the golden rule. You'll notice I wasn't doing the voice then. I'm not that. I'm going to attempt that. It's an ethos that would find its way into his writing, where common decency would be a constant theme. When Pratchett talked of his early childhood, the word he used most often was idyllic. Or idyllic. I don't know. Idyllic. The endless fields that bordered 40 Green contained the potential for limitless adventures of a sort familiar to anyone who grew up in the English countryside. It's a landscape full of trees made for climbing, brooks ideal for damming, and abandoned quarries, woods and scrubland, perfect for dens and dares. In a contribution to a collection of in a contribution to a 1996 book called Playground Memories, which is a collection of celebrity childhood reminiscences, he explained how he and a gang of 4 or 5 other scrubby, scabby-kneed kids would assemble in Roundhead Wood, a little copse of trees surrounded by a chalk pit that would become, in their imaginations, ancient forests, alien worlds, or any other landscape that their games required. There they would battle monsters, get into fights, and indulge in that quintessential hobby of small boys everywhere, throwing themselves recklessly from the top of something high. In this case, it involved climbing a young beech tree, then leaping across to another and sliding down its smooth trunk, hopefully avoiding the spiky embrace of the holly bushes below. His childhood, as he told the Times in 2005, felt like a summer's day that would never end. Unusually for one of the baby boomer generation, Terry never had brothers or sisters. Later he would say that he was an only child, but not a lonely one, a theme that would recur many times in his work. As an adult author, he would create many young characters, from the troubled and thoughtful Johnny Maxwell in Only You Can Save Mankind, to Adam in Good Omens, Escarina in Equal Rights, and Tiffany Aching, one of his finest creations, in The We Free Men. All are either only children or of siblings who barely feature in their lives. They're sensible children, content in the company of their friends and themselves. In truth, the only time Pratchett regretted his lack of siblings was on the odd occasion when a bigger brother would have come in handy against a playground bully. Otherwise, he saw nothing but upsides. He got more attention from his parents, the money didn't have to stretch as far, so he got better presents, and he never had to share his toys. There are many melancholy tropes of the impoverished only child who grew up to become a famous writer. An entire genre of misery-based literature is built on this very fact. None of those is present in the life of the young Terry Pratchett. He was well loved at home and well liked by his friends. It would have been a perfect childhood had it not been for one crucial factor. Eventually, he would have to go to school. Terry's formal education began in the autumn of 1953, one day later than everyone else in his class. The Pratchetts had been on holiday and their trip had overlapped with the start of the school year. A family vacation would have meant months of savings, so why would they cut it short for a single day of school? It's characteristic of David and Eileen, who would often prioritise quality family time over more mundane commitments. Terry arrived at the school gates on day 2 of term and found the other children had formed friendship groups, established a class hierarchy, worked out who sat where, and claimed all the cooler coat pegs. Terry was left with a peg marked with a pair of cherries, while other kids hung their jackets beneath soldiers or space rockets. And you can see my cat in the background, that's Princess. Hi, Princess. It seems very appropriate to be reading about Terry Pratchett and have a cat lurking about. Terry was left with a peg marked with a pair of cherries while other kids hung their jackets beneath soldiers or space rockets. Those boring cherries were a glossy scarlet representation of his outsider status. His school career began on the back foot. He was attending Hotspur County Primary School on Cherry Tree Road, a short walk from 40 Green. Hotspur was a fairly typical village school, catering for around 100 pupils. It had opened its doors just 2 years earlier and consisted of a modern red brick building and a huge playing field. The school was overseen by a headmaster, Henry William Tame, known professionally as H.W. Tame, and informally as Bill. An experienced and energetic educator who had a hand in the design of the new school will remain head at Hotspur for another 30 years. Tame's ethos would have a profound effect on the young Terry Pratchett, giving him a lifelong distrust of teachers and of formal education. In many ways, Tame was a pioneer. He published 2 books on sex education, Time to Grow Up in 1966 and Peter and Pamela Grow Up in 1969, which were at odds with the stuffy views of the time. He composed a school song and wrote and often starred in an annual pantomime. Many of the children under his care adored him, and there was a great outpouring of affection from the local community when he died in 2002 at the age of 85. Among the various tributes printed in local press at the time, the words Terry Pratchett are conspicuous by their absence. It's not a surprise. When Terry was just 6 years old, Tame had already marked him down as someone who was unlikely to succeed in life. Little bit of background here. Have we gone on too long? Do you want more? Should we do more? I think we should do a bit more. So there's a bit here where I talk about the Education Act, which I'll just gloss over this bit, but basically it's about how you went to grammar school or technical school if you're a little bit brighter, or if you're super clever, you went to grammar school, then you went to technical school if you weren't that clever, or you went to a normal comprehensive school.
More, says Rocket.
So yeah, the Education Act did that, and a lot of primary school kids would actually have this system imposed on them. So, Julius Welby is on. He's going to be quoted in a minute. Hold tight for that, Julius. So, infant and primary schools were under no obligation to segregate classes, though many of them did. It was common practice to begin the process early, and children were often grouped by ability from the age of 6. Many teachers believed that an assessment of a child of 6 could accurately predict their academic progress through life. H.W. Tame was one such teacher. Hotspur pupil Julius Welby, who is on the line, who attended a school a few years after Terry, provides a neat summary of Tame. He said, he was a forward-thinking man, especially in terms of sex education, and yet strangely backwards in his emotional perception. He seemed to think there was only one way in which a child should develop, hitting the various milestones, physical and mental, on time and in the approved manner. If you fit the mould, Mr. Tame was a great influence and teacher. If you didn't, one was left looking back like Terry with polite bafflement, pain, and the most mixed of feelings. A 1963 book, selected at 6 by the Hotspur teacher Joan Goldman, charts a year in a primary school suspiciously similar to Hotspur, with a headmaster suspiciously similar to Tame. Now, in his introduction to a piece about Hotspur School in A Slip of the Keyboard, which is a collection of his non-fiction, Terry mentions this book about Tame, selected at 6. Now, he might be referring to another book entirely, but I've been unable to find a trace of it if that's the case. So we can assume he means Joan Goldman's book, and that she's changed all the names in the book and details to protect the innocent. Either that or Terry just got muddled up. I've got a copy of Selected at 6 somewhere, but it seems to have gone missing. But I did look it up. So anyway, in it she says of her headmaster, Mr. Collins, at the age of 5.5, he can tell which of the pupils will be invited to occupy a seat in the local grammar school and which of them won't. Goldman has Collins dividing the youngest members of the school into A or B groups, also known as wills and won'ts, or more crudely, sheep and goats. Collins would freely use the phrase in front of the children, a practice that seems jarringly cruel by modern standards. That Terry uses exactly the same language in his various remembrances suggests that so-called Mr. Collins may have been more than familiar to him. Terry was an introspective little boy who arrived a day late, out of step with his classmates and possessing a wild imagination that meant he would rather be daydreaming his own stories than learning to read other people's. Tame, as fellow alumni Julius Welby notes, delivered his opinions with complete and crushing certainty, and he saw Terry as the very definition of a goat or a backwards child, and said so. To Tame, goats were a species apart. As Welby, who was also dubbed a B student, says, it seemed at the time his judgment was not so much of your performance but of your nature. Goats are not sheep having a bad day. They are an entirely different thing. Being placed among the goats impacted Terry in several ways. Some positive, some not. None of them was the intended result of segregation. Terry never received the special and specific attention from teachers that streaming promised, nor were the lessons usually suitable for his level, and he often found himself either ahead or behind the rest of the class. Tame's view of education focused almost fanatically on the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. As Goldman observed in a book, he was accustomed to riding roughshod over parents' and teachers' wishes on the subject, and Terry always struggled with such a nuts and bolts approach, responding more positively when his imagination was engaged. A few years later, when reading and writing had become a passion, the arithmetic would still be lagging behind. But goathood had unexpected benefits. It lit a bonfire under both mother and son. Eileen Pratchett was not about to let her only child languish on the B pile just because an uppity headmaster said so. She was determined that Tame's decision wouldn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eileen took Terry's reading into her own hands, initially with the endless patience of a natural teacher, and later, when Terry's tendency to get distracted got in the way, by resorting to bribery, promising to pay him a penny for every page of a book he could read out loud to her. Terry would later point out that this early financial outlay was a sound investment for his parents, since he was able to buy them a comfortable house in affluent Hay-on-Wye when they retired. Encouraging your son's literacy pays off when he grows up to be a multi-millionaire author. Spoiler alert. She also found a local teacher to help fill in the lessons denied to the B classes at Hotspur. While the lessons at school remained dry and, appropriately enough, tame, Eileen's knack for spinning a yarn was able to keep Terry engaged and interested. He fell in love with learning, and those lessons nudged the first snowflakes in the avalanche of knowledge he acquired across a lifetime of unending research, done mostly for the sheer joy of finding out something new. Additional homeschooling, however, wasn't without its drawbacks. Eileen did a job too well. On one horrible occasion, the class was asked to explain where rain came from. When Terry confidently replied, "the sea," the other children, who all knew the answer was obviously the sky, erupted into laughter. Rather than be impressed with a child who already knew the cycles of evaporation and precipitation, Terry's teacher joined in with the jeering. His lifelong anger with poor teachers is rooted in as much in that one event as in Tame's earlier prediction. The incident kickstarted Terry's competitive streak. As school progressed, he regularly found himself ahead of the other goats. He was a dreamy and introspective kid, yes, but he was also clever and enjoyed being top of the class, a position he probably wouldn't have managed had he been placed among the sheep. As Terry's school career progressed, 2 interests would start to dominate his spare time. The first was the night sky and a love of all things astronomical, and the second was reading for pleasure. The 2 would dovetail neatly, and the combination of these passions would start a chain reaction that would shape the rest of his life. Astronomy came first. Astronomy came first. Terry traced his love of stargazing to the age of 9. Brook Bond Tea, which had a long tradition of including collectible cards in its packaging, had launched a series called Out into Space, capitalizing on the escalating space race between Soviet Russia and the United States. Previous card collections featuring wildflowers or British birds hadn't really sparked much interest, but this was different. The first card Terry found was number 9, Planets and Then Moons. The pictures on the front were basically coloured blobs with labels, but the text on the reverse was fascinating. Terry read the words Ganymede, Callisto and Titan for the first time, absorbing their distances from Earth and sizes in relation to Jupiter and Saturn. It was mesmerising. The next step was to collect the remaining 11 cards, and the family embarked on a prolific period of tea drinking in order to secure the full set. Each card contained a ropey illustration and some solid scientific facts: the phases of the moon, the order, comparative sizes and orbits of the planets, the rotation of the Earth, and so on. Terry was fascinated, and he decided that a career in astronomy beckoned. His parents bought him a telescope. It was very cheap and the lens somewhat blurry, but the skies above the Chilterns were clear, and it was a good enough piece of kit to make out, albeit fuzzily, the rings of Saturn and the moons of Jupiter and provide fantastically detailed lunar views. It wasn't until he was 10 years old that finally, after years of patient teaching and the odd bribe from his mother, Terry read a book of his own volition. It was Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows, a much imitated classic, following the exploits of talking animals who drive cars, dress up as washerwomen, and have adventures. Crucially, it was given to Terry by a friend of the family known as Uncle Don during a trip to London. It wasn't mandated by a teacher, and his mother wasn't paying him to read it. It had been handed to him casually and thus bred no resentment or obligation. He read it in a single sitting, starting on the drive home in his father's old Jowett Javelin by the glow of the roadside sodium lights, concentrating so as not to lose his place when the car went into the shadows. When he finished, he returned to the beginning and read it again. He was entranced by Graham's weird reality, where some animals spoke and drank tea and others were mute and pulled carts. It was a direct line back to that visit to Gamage's department store when a world of wonder had opened up to him and a line forward to his career as a writer. Terry became, almost overnight, a voracious reader. He read without discernment, fiction, fact, reference, anything he could get his hands on. No one had bothered to tell him that some books were intended for children and others for adults. To Terry, everything was fair game. He read T.H. White's Mistress Mashan's Ripoff and was delighted that it took another book he'd read, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, and treated it as if it was true. He read Just William, The Moomins, Jeeves and Wooster. He read his way along his grandmother's treasured bookshelf, discovering Charles Dickens and G.K. Chesterton, and when that was exhausted, he headed for the newly opened public library. Terry's entry in Who's Who, the regularly updated guide to influential Britons, lists his place as education as Beaconsfield Library. It's not an exaggeration. Many years later, a plaque would be unveiled outside the building celebrating his life. His daughter Rihanna released a statement to mark the occasion, saying, "Dad was born in Beaconsfield, but Terry Pratchett, the author, was born at Beaconsfield Library. This was the place that Dad got his education." Terry entered his local library with the enthusiasm of a ravished orangutan given the keys to a banana plantation. He read everything from children's books to dictionaries, consuming facts and fiction alike, constantly filing the information away as he began to build a picture of the world far more vivid than the one he was being taught at Holsworth School. One of his first stops was the astronomy shelves, where he rapidly added to the knowledge he'd acquired from collecting tea cards. Most of the books on space contained an introductory chapter exploring various myths about the universe that had been discarded in favour of proper science. In one such book, he came across an old belief in many cultures that the world is a flat disc carried through space on the back of a huge turtle. A version of this idea specific to Hindu mythology added 4 giant elephants to stand on the turtle's shell and hold the disc of the world on their backs. Now, the film critic Mark Kermode often talks about a trope found in the cheaper sort of movie biopics that he calls chubby referencing the scene in the Karen Carpenter story. He actually credits the story to John Ronson, though it's Kermode who popularised it, where an offhand comment about the singer's weight clumsily foreshadows her anorexia. In the straight-to-DVD version of Terry Pratchett's life, this is that moment. There should be a light bulb switching on over his head, or at least a shot of a young boy staring into the distance and rubbing his chin thoughtfully. In truth, the ancient disc-shaped world was just another fact, another image, another piece of trivia to be carefully filed away for later recall, and at the time, the young Terry thought very little of it. The biggest revelation he took from the books on astronomy was that the study of stars involved a lot of difficult maths, something Terry struggled with, and he soon abandoned it as a career choice. The stargazing, however, led him to the science fiction section, and science fiction led him to fantasy. Over the years, fantasy led into mythology and ancient history, which led to modern history, and back to science again. Every book, every story, every fact added something new to the pile. There's a scene in Terry's 1992 novel, Small Gods, where Brother, the illiterate hero with a photographic memory, rescues a library's worth of information from destruction by simply looking at the pages of the books it contains until he has the accumulated knowledge of the ages floating around in his head, ready to be written down later. Terry's experience in Beaconsfield Library was less dramatic, but just as immersive. Eventually, his reading habits started outpacing the library's lending limits. He was only allowed to borrow 2 books at a time, and it simply wasn't enough. The solution was simple. He asked the librarian for a job. At just 10 years old, he became a Saturday boy, working for free, filing, stamping, and carrying books in return for the opportunity to write out his own library tickets. The library's filing system had 2 drawers, one of books currently out on loan to the public, and another of books currently borrowed by Terry Pratchett. He claimed in an interview with Science Fiction Review in 2004 that at one point he had 143 library books on loan at the same time. H.W. Tame had written off Terry Pratchett as one of life's losers by the time he was 6, and then provided a school program that did everything possible to ensure that prediction was right. Despite Terry's voracious reading habit and Eileen's careful tutelage, he would spend his entire primary school career in the B class. Tame never revised his opinion. In 1958, around the time the family moved to a council house in Hotspur, this time possessing modern amenities such as electricity and running water, Terry and the other goats took their 11+ exam. It was Tame who delivered the results, walking around the classroom, stopping at each child's desk one by one. When he got to Terry, his announcement was met with silence from the class. Terry was the only child in the year to prove the headmaster wrong. He had passed. And that's chapter 1. Hooray. That is chapter 1 of The Magic of Terry Pratchett. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really proud of that chapter. And I think it sets the scene pretty well. I'm just going to have some beer. Can't wait to read this, says Nathaniel Johnson. Steve Fielding says, do they all die in the end? Spoiler alert. The one person does die in the end, yes. But then everyone does. But yeah, I'm really proud of that first chapter. I think it sets the scene well. So what I thought I'd do was tell you about how I pieced together these various bits
Applause for
of information. Oh, applause! A bright beat. That's my friend Amy. I like Amy.
Applause from Amy.
Hi, Amy. So yeah, that's it. It's hang on, I'm just reading comments. It's very off-putting to be reading comments. So yeah, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how I put this together, because there's various sources, and I did so much reading. Terry's agent, Colin Smythe, donated his entire archive, his professional archive, and he was Terry's agent from 1971 right up until the day he died. And he donated his entire archive to the University of London Library. So, and you can access it if you've got a good enough reason. And I read the entire press archive. So I read every single piece of press that was ever written about Terry Pratchett. So a lot of this came from various interviews. It was a case of like later in the book, there's primary sources, whereby, you know, where I actually interviewed people. Julius Welby, who is quoted in here, somebody I found on Twitter, and he was able to give me some first person stuff. But and later I interviewed people who knew Terry, who worked alongside him. Obviously, very little of that was possible this far back. So this is based on interviews. A lot of it was taken. Various books helped me with this. A lot of it was taken from this book. Terry Pratchett's A Slip of the Keyboard, which I can't recommend highly enough. There isn't an official biography of Terry Pratchett available yet. Mine will be the first real biography anyone's ever done. There will be an official biography at some point. This is the closest you'll get to an official Pratchett biography. It's a collection of non-fiction, of essays and articles that he wrote over the years, and a lot. So there's a lot of facts in here listed about. And you have to do a lot of piecing together, and also you have to do a lot of trying to work out if what he says is true or not. Heart eyes, thank you. So some of that information is from work that was in this. The Gamages story, for example, that was from the introduction to a stage version of Truckers that's included here, and various speeches. Other bits came from, like, there's other interviews that he gave over the years. Desert Island Discs, he talked a lot about his early childhood, various things. So yeah, it's so that was the main thing. But that I think was the main source for this. But there's loads of other places, like the story about where the idea for Discworld comes from. That's actually alluded to in the introduction to the second printing of The Colour of Magic, the second hardback printing, where he talks about where the idea came from, and then he expands on it in an interview in the back of the Discworld Companion. And it really was like an incidental idea that he just like came across this notion. So that's really useful. And then you talk about what it was like in 40 Green. So I went to 40 Green. I took my bike there. I cycled around Beaconsfield. I went to Beaconsfield Library. I thought it was really important to be able to describe these places. So I went to Beaconsfield Library. I know it hasn't changed since the 60s. I did a bit of research in the library. I could see the shape, so I could describe the rooms. It's two rooms and a mezzanine. I saw the plaque outside. I looked at local records while I was there. I found Terry's address. From the 60s, I found David and Eileen Pratchett's address. So I went to where their presumably house isn't anymore, because there's a modern house there. But from there, I was able to see how long it would take him to walk to school. I went and looked at the school. Hang on. This is Princess. She's helping. Say hi, Princess. Meow. Yeah, I went to Beaconsfield. I saw how long it would take to walk from Terry's house to the school. I looked at the school, so I could describe it properly. I also just cycled around the countryside, and I from Terry's house, and I saw what was around. I tried to work out what was there in the 50s and 60s, and that's how I could describe the town, which I thought was really, really important to do. And other things with the school years, like I got hold of this. Peter and Pamela Grow Up by H.W. Taine. This is one of the books on sex education that Pratchett's head teacher wrote. Now, basically nothing from this turned up in the book, but it got my head around his mindset. and around kind of the kind of person who was teaching Terry, and for that was really useful. Also, just because it's really funny, can you imagine being 11 years old and being given this book and just finding these pages? Like, that would be funny as fuck, wouldn't it? Like, there is not an 11-year-old in the world who doesn't laugh at this diagram. But yeah, I found that. And then Terry mentions in passing in one interview, this book Selected at 6. So I tracked down Selected at 6, and it's really annoying me that I can't find it. Because it was really useful. Selected at 6 was written by a teacher at Terry's school, and it described H.W. Tame, albeit under a pseudonym, and what the school was like. So that was really invaluable. So I can get an idea. So you start to piece together these little things, and it comes from loads of different sources. I found out about Terry's family through archive research. I could find out the date they got married through parish records. There is a military record system you can access. So I found out. All I knew about Terry's dad was that he was stationed near Karachi. And his name. Those are the only two bits of information we had. But that was enough for me to check the records. There was a couple of David Pratchett's. I was able to narrow them down. So suddenly I know how old he was when he joined the Air Force. I know that he joined voluntarily. So it's about putting together all these little bits of pieces, little bits and pieces. Colin Smythe's website is if you're a fan of Terry Pratchett, I really recommend Colin Smythe's website. He was Terry's agent for years, as I said, and it's not the most easy to navigate website in the world, but is an absolute treasure trove of stories, and there's loads of good stuff there. So yeah, that. Oh, and the other thing that is really, really useful, I found, was this Terry Pratchett, His World, which was the official companion to an exhibition that happened a few years ago. And there's a lot of useful stuff in this as well. Some really good little essays written by various friends of Terry that each one would give you like a crumb of information, just this little bit of information that was there'd just be enough to start, just be enough to sort of push you on the way, and I'd know where to go to find something else. What I like most about this is it has Terry's school picture in it at the front, which I really love. I actually managed to track that photo, the full school. That's actually a cropped in picture of a full school photo. I've managed to I tracked down the full picture, so there's a bigger version of that that's in the book. What I like about it is Terry is sat cross-legged at the front, pulling a face, because he was because he was a weird kid. And there's a brilliant bit in Men at Arms where he talks about where Vimes is looking at the Assassin's Guild school pictures of all the private school kids sat like that, and he says there's a footnote that says this with a small person at the front cross-legged pulling a face, because somebody always does, or there's always one, I think it's a quote. Terry should know, because it's him. That was Terry. Oh, Teresa said she went to His World. I couldn't go. It really annoyed me I didn't get to go. But if you didn't get to go to the His World exhibition, the book is really good. You can get it from the Discworld Emporium website. So yeah, the process of putting all this together was literally, you'd find this one crumb of information, and then you'd just follow the tracks, and you'd do a lot more deep research. Rihanna Pratchett's article about her childhood was really useful as well, because she talked about her grandparents, and that article came in useful a little bit later on too. What I think is interesting about Terry's childhood is you can see how much of his later stuff comes in. Basically, the childhood in Good Omens. Oh yes. The childhood of Adam and the Them in Good Omens, in the town of Lower Tadfield, where it's set, is basically 40 Green. It's basically Beaconsfield. He just wrote his own childhood. That's that childhood in Good Omens, which is deliberately based on the Just William books, is Terry's childhood. Like he gives the wood a different name, but it's the same wood that he played in as a child, which I managed to find. There's even an American Air Force base near Beaconsfield. So you kind of you build up this piece one at a time, and you find these little images, like he talks about the skeletal fish swimming in the chalk pit that he imagined, and that image turns up in one of the Tiffany Aching novels. I find it really interesting, and you can see like the man and the writer he would become sort of being pieced together a little bit at a time. So yeah, it was really good. I'd like to say thanks, because I know he's watching, to Julius Welby, who gave me some quotes. He went to Hotspur School, went through that experience of being declared a goat rather than a sheep, and being told essentially that you're on the B pile of life. And it was really useful to have some quotes from someone who went through that experience at that same school. So yeah, that's how I put it together. And the other thing, the T cards. The Brook Bond T cards. I mean, I remember PG Tips used to have cards when I was a kid as well, so I kind of got it. But I did a bit of research and I found the Brook Bond. Terry mentioned that there was Brook Bond T cards, and the first one he found had planets and their moons. So I did a bit of research. I found them. I found pictures of them. I found that the one he was looking at was number 9, and I was able to look at it, and you could look at it and you could see what Terry saw. Like, you remember, this was the 60s. You don't know what planets looked like in the same detail we do now. We didn't have high-powered telescopes. We'd never sent satellites to Saturn and Jupiter to photograph them. So they're kind of artist impressions. But you can see the information that was there, and these rough pictures that was enough to spark his imagination. So you follow the trail. And it all comes together. The other thing I found interesting, the Wind in the Willows story. He told that a lot. The Wind in the Willows was the first book he ever read. But what I thought was really shouldn't be exciting. It was exciting to me. Is when I found an interview he did in, I think it was the Evening Standard in the early 90s, and it was the only interview I found where he talked about being given the book by somebody called Uncle Don, and it mentioned the kind of car that his dad had, a Jowett Javelin, and that he'd read it on the way home from London in the glow of the roadside sodium lights, and that's a really poetic image. It's a really beautiful image that I can remember doing that myself, reading books, although not that much because I got travel sick. And it was that one, like, finding that one nugget, that one detail was worth, and it was probably the only thing I found that day that was usable. But just finding that one sentence in that one interview, from a random interview from the early 90s, adds so much kind of colour to that section, which is actually, if you read about Terry's life, the Wind in the Willows factor, the Wind in the Willows thing is actually a fairly common. It's a fact that a lot of people know, but those little details that you find just by carrying on, sinking into the levels and going deeper and deeper and deeper, I just find that really interesting. So that is how I put it all together, and that is chapter 1. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you have any questions, let's do some Q&A. So anyone have any questions? Lots of nice comments. Thank you very much. Kaz says that's actually so well written. I can't wait to read it. I am actually genuinely so excited for people to read this book, and it annoys me that people can't. And I've got it now. I've got a PDF of the whole thing, and I just want to send it to everyone, and I can't. It would make it would be commercial suicide, but I really just want to say, whenever I've made records for my band, there's a point where it exists and the album's made, and you just we always have a go at our singer, because he always ends up sending the tracks out to people, because you just want people to consume them. I can't wait for you to read it either. Jesse says, we're doing a book signing, maybe, hopefully. I mean, will I be able to leave my house? Will we be able to gather in groups? I don't know. I want to do some signings. We're going to have a launch party somewhere. I'm not sure how many people will be interested in my signature for this book anyway, but that's so. Hopefully there'll be a book signing.
Which is your favourite chapter?
Which is my favourite chapter? Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is chapter 3 is Terry becoming a journalist. So chapter 1 is childhood and primary school. Chapter 2 is high school and becoming a writer, writing his first books, writing his first short stories. And then chapter 3 is when he becomes a journalist. And that, I thought, was one of the most interesting things to research. It was the first chapter I wrote. And what was really, I went to the British Library and I found he worked for a newspaper called the Bucks Free Press, which is a local newspaper in South Buckinghamshire, and the British Library has an archive of them. So I found, I found the first issue he contributed to. I found the short stories he wrote, the original version of The Carpet People, and I was able to like find things he'd referenced in his life and find them in the pages of this newspaper, and that was really exciting. So I found the interview he did with Roald Dahl in 1968, which has never been republished, and I doubt anyone else has read it in the last 10 years. It's not even published under his name. He used to write under a pseudonym when he wrote features. He wrote under the pseudonym Marcus. And there's this interview with Roald Dahl he did with pictures. He went to Roald Dahl's house, interviewed him, talked about children's books. This is before Roald Dahl was even particularly famous. My favourite quote in that book, in that interview, is it says, Roald Dahl, who is probably best known as the husband of actress Patricia, I've forgotten her surname, but that was just genuinely, I thought was really cute. So yeah, my favourite chapter is chapter 3. That's the one to look out for, because it's got the stuff that I don't think people know, and I found some journalists who worked with Terry in the 60s and talked to them about that. And so I think like that's why there's a lot of stories that people don't know. In your research, did you discover something that you didn't previously know about Terry? Loads of stuff. The Roald Dahl thing was brilliant. The fact that he interviewed Roald Dahl, I thought that was like the idea that these two people who would go on to become two of the most profound and sort of popular writers of the 20th century, the British writers of the 20th century, met before either of them became famous. Neither of them knew the other one was going to become famous as a writer, and that was extraordinary. That's really interesting to read that interview. There's loads of stuff about his time as a journalist that I didn't know about that was really, really funny. Facts about him fainting in the presence of an editor. That's a great story that I'll leave for you to find in the book, and stuff like that. So yeah, there's loads of stuff I didn't know. In every chapter there's stuff I didn't know, and the more research I did, the more I found out. So that was really good. Oh yes.
Which parts did you struggle with the most?
Which parts did I struggle with the most? So I think the hardest part of the book to write, because the book's got like Terry's life is a pretty standard 3-act structure, right? It works really well. You've got the beginning of his life, and we don't know much about that. So that's interesting. How he became a writer, how he became a journalist, how he became famous, like how he became how that career, how you get from being the kid we've just been talking about to somebody with best-selling books. That is an interesting story. And then the end of the story is really sad and it's heartbreaking, and it was so difficult to write, but it's compelling and it's interesting because the end of Terry's life was compelling and interesting and important. You know, he did important stuff in the last 10 years of his life. He wrote some of his best work, and he became an activist and a campaigner, and that's really important. So the end of the story is really compelling and really interesting as well. The hardest bit to write was the middle bit, because between, say, 1987 and 2008, or 1987, let's say, 2000, Terry wrote about 30 books. Like he was pumping them out 2 a year, and he didn't really do very much except write books. So the middle section is man writes books. So the hardest bit of the whole book was to make that middle section interesting. So that middle section becomes a lot more about the writing and about how he developed as a writer, and how the fandom around his work started to emerge, and how popular he became, and the development of his work, and that kind of thing of becoming wealthy and becoming a well-known figure, and building an identity and that sort of thing. And stuff like how films got made, like Discworld films. Oh, something I didn't know about Terry Pratchett. The most interesting thing I found out about Terry Pratchett is that Disney nearly made a animated classic musical Disney film based on Mort. That's the thing I found out that was most interesting. I can't remember the name of the directors now, but the directors, the two guys who directed The Little Mermaid and Hercules, which is one of my favorite films ever, and Moana recently, they did pre-production and were going to adapt Mort. And then it fell through. There was a rights issue. That's my favorite thing that I found out. So yeah, but the middle bit was the hardest bit to write. strangest and most interesting thing I came across. Yeah, the Disney thing. That was definitely the weirdest thing. But I really like it.
I have to ask.
You have to ask?
I have to ask. I feel like for me there was quite a shift in perception around you writing a biography before and after the viral tweet. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Nicoletta, just off camera, just asked that there was a difference after there was a difference in how the book was going after a tweet went viral. So what happened is in the summer of 2019, I was doing research in the library, and I came across an interview that Terry had done with Bill Gates for GQ magazine in 1996, I think it was. And Terry had interviewed Gates. They'd asked Terry to do this interview. It's a really interesting piece, and in it, there's obviously Terry. Many of you will know Terry was a technology fanatic. Was really into. He was a proper geek, and he was by 1996 he was all over the internet. He was totally on top of that stuff. But for a lot of people, it was still emerging. And he asked Bill Gates about the internet and about how information was going to spread online. And he brings up the example: what if somebody writes an article saying that the Holocaust didn't happen and gives it and lists it as a legitimate piece of historical analysis, and it's seen as just as interesting, just as valid as historical truth, and basically fake news being spread online. And Bill Gates replied, "I'll be fine," basically. And what was really interesting is that was Pratchett. The media world we live in now, how the internet has affected how news and information spreads. Pratchett predicted that in 1996. So I took a photo of that little thing and I thought it was interesting. I tweeted it, and the tweet went mad. I think a lot of you watching probably would have found out about this project through that tweet. And it was really what was good about that. It didn't really energize me in terms of the work I was doing, but in terms of the perception of the work I was doing. It went from no one really cares about this, it's just a random guy writing a book, to something people were actually really interested in. It got press. It became a viral story, and that really energized the project. People started to really pay attention. I was able to build a mailing list. Word started to really get out, so it absolutely lit a fire. That was the most important, coolest bit of the whole thing. Right, we'll do a couple more questions, and then we're going to run out of time. But I better say goodbye to Instagram. Instagram's going to go now. Sorry, I had set for an hour. But I'll get through by Instagram. But I'll get through the rest of these questions. Was it true that he saw his first dead body on his second day at a journalist, or was this just a Terry story? Good question. Actually, he said it was his first day as a journalist. That was a story he told a lot. I don't know. If you don't know the background of this story, Terry said often that he saw a dead body on his first day working in the Box Free Press, and he viscerally described what it looked like, and it had a profound effect on him. I went through every copy of the Books Free Press from 1965, and I couldn't find a reference to that story. Does that mean it didn't happen? Not necessarily. There's loads of reasons why that didn't happen. Why it couldn't? It could have been outside of the jurisdiction of the paper. The story could have been spiked for some reason. He could have misremembered it, and it could have been the facts could have been different, so I couldn't find it. My theory, he definitely saw a dead body. He definitely did. It might not have been on his first day, but he definitely saw one. When he describes it, it's really obvious, and the feeling of it turns up in his work a few times. There's a bit in Only You Can Save Mankind where Big Mac character sees a dead body, and you can just tell that writing was coming from somewhere. I don't think it happened on his first day. I think it happened at some other point during his career as a journalist. Can't say that for sure, because all I can tell you for sure is that that incident, as he described it, doesn't turn up in the book's repress in 1965. That's all I can say with any certainty, and that's what I say in the book. Like, this is like, I'm not going to say anything for sure because we don't know. But it's clear to me that he definitely saw a body when he was very young, and it definitely had an impression on him. I'm not sure it happened on his first day though. So yeah, good question. Will your book be available in the US and Canada at the same time that it's available in England? Apparently, yes. The publisher has a US wing. It'll definitely be available on Kindle. I think the hard copies will be available too. If you go to the publisher's called Pen and Sword. If you look them up, you can probably find that. Don't know about Canada, but they'll definitely be available on Kindle, and international shipping isn't that expensive. If you get it from my my website, if you go to askmeaboutterrypratchett.com, you can actually pre-order it now, and I can ship it internationally. It's not like super cheap, but you definitely get one. But I think it'll be out in the US and Australia. Certainly not sure about Canada. I will check for you. Without being too humble, do you see a bit of Terry Pratchett in you? That's in some ways not at all. I mean, like, I haven't got his sponge-like brain. I haven't got his intelligence. We had a similar upbringing. That's something that struck me, actually, that I didn't know about. Is when I read about his childhood, it reminded me of myself a lot. Of myself as a little boy. I think my mum, who's watching as well, Nicoletta showing her some tiny witch's hat there. I was that kind of child. And if you read the Johnny Maxwell books, which are basically like Terry describing himself as a child, I always really related to those. So I think we came from a similar background, and I think we had a similar worldview. He was snippier than me. He was cleverer than me by a long, long way. So yeah, I can't say 100% for sure that I wouldn't say I'm like him, but I think I related to him, which is one of the, and that shouldn't surprise me because I always related to his work. So finding out that I related to him as a person isn't that surprising. But yeah, so that's that. I loved the threat the other week, guessing the first and last entries in the index. Are there packages that build an index for you, like bibliographics? Oh no, I did the index completely manually. I actually look forward to doing it. I just went through the book and did it manually, and it was fun to put. I hid in jokes in there. There's if you read the index of the book, there's some stupid in jokes, and I was really proud of it. Nicoletta, Zach waved back at you. That's my cousin's little boy who's amazing. Hi, Zach. Who's your favourite Discworld character? I'm going to be asked this a lot. I should have a good answer for this. Death, but everyone says Death, don't they? Everyone's. I don't want to say an obvious one because the reason the good ones relate to you is because they're so well written, which is why everyone loves Vimes and why everyone loves Tiffany Aching and why everyone loves Granny. There is something about like Rincewind had a very specific role in Discworld, and about halfway through the process, his usefulness was lived up because Terry wasn't writing sort of galloping travel adventures anymore, and that's what Rincewind was. He was a tour guide. But I do really like the way Rincewind sees the world. It is something. Gaspode is a brilliant character. Oh, hi Mandy. Favorite book is favorite character is a tricky one. I really like Ponder Stibbons. I really like Rob Anybody. I'm just going to list Discworld characters here. I've got loads of favourite ones. I don't have a favourite strand of Discworld novels. I love Nanny Ogg. Nanny Ogg is like one of the finest literary creations. Sergeant Colon, amazing literary creation. I just love most of them. Which publisher did I use? The publisher. I mean, it's not so much that I used. I'm not so much using them as they are using me. I guess I am a bit. It's been published by a company called Pen and Sword. They're quite a small publisher. They mostly do historical books, actually. They've got an imprint called White Owl that is putting out this. They're really good. The Luggage. I've never been that fond of the Luggage as a character. It's funny and it's a funny character, but it's kind of run out. You could tell that Terry ran out of ideas for the Luggage by the fact that the last couple of Rincewind books, the luggage just disappears in the beginning of the book and doesn't come back till the end. You can see that character had ran its course via the pitter patter of its tiny legs by the fact that in Interesting Times, and Eric actually, in Eric Interesting Times and The Last Continent, the luggage basically is taken off screen and comes back at the end, which says a lot about how much time Terry had for that character. And when Richmond comes back, he doesn't even come back. There was one other question that I've missed. US book tour? God, I wish. If my band goes on tour in the US, I will try my hardest to do some. When and how do we buy books? I would prefer you book them from me because I get the money then. Ask me about terrypratchett.com. There's some quite cool packages. You can get it on Amazon. You can buy it directly from my publisher. I think all of the standard British websites have it.
Final question.
Final question?
Final question. Yeah, I've really, really, really enjoyed your talk today. Can you tell me more about the pre-order bundles that are on your website?
Thank you. I will tell you all more about the pre-order bundles that are on my website. I'll quickly run through them. I'll go to my website and ask me about terrypratchett.com.
I can't wait to get my hands on it. I want to know what else I'm going to get.
Okay, so the pre-order bundles you can get the standard edition, £16, which is just a signed book. I will ruin it by writing on it if you want. There's an edition called the Snapcase edition, where you get some badges and an art print. The artwork for the book is fucking amazing. I found this artist called Andrea C. White. Her work is beautiful, and she wrote this. She just did this picture off her own back. She was doing some Good Omens fan stuff, and she did this picture based on a photo of Terry, and it just summed up everything I wanted to feel about this book. I saw it online. Rihanna Pratchett retweeted, so I contacted her and asked if I could use it for the book, and and she was really nice about it. So you get. I wanted to give people an art print, so you can get. So yeah, the Snapcase edition, you just get the art print and some badges. There's a version called the Patrician Box where you get a tote bag that says "Ask me about Terry Pratchett" plus the artwork plus the badges, and an extras book. I'm going to write some like DVD extras, so you'll have an extra book that has all of the interviews I did in their complete form. There's a really good interview with Nigel Planer, who played Neil in The Young Ones, and I went for dinner with him to do the interview, and it was so exciting. And I in the end I used hardly any of the interview in the book, but I'm going to put it's a good interview, but I can put the full thing in there. So the full interviews and some bits and bobs, basically DVD extras, and you get a badge that says "Ask me about Terry Pratchett," and then there's something I've called the Nice and Accurate edition by the S and F, like in the olden days. And there you get in that one you also get an artwork book from Andrea, who did the cover, and it's her Good Omens artwork, and she gets it's basically the same as a Snapcase edition plus an extra £25, and she gets that £25 because I wanted to show how much I appreciate the artwork. So yeah, that's that. Those are the things.
Where do we get that?
And you get that from askmeaboutterrypratchett.com. So there's one other question I wanted to answer, if I can find it. Pat Ross, Rosa Taylor here, said, "What made you decide to write this book?" Someone's just bought one. Oh, thanks. My watch gave me an alert. That's exciting. Oh, that's so exciting. What made you decide to write this book? There are two answers. David Jackson just bought the Patrician set. Thanks, David. There's two answers to why did I want to write this book. Firstly, no one had written a book about Terry Pratchett before, and there's a lot about his life I wanted to find out. So I bought one. I don't want to shit on another writer here, but I bought this Terry Pratchett and the Spirit of Fantasy, which it's online because I thought it was a biography, and it's not a biography. It's got a little bit of biography, and then it's just loads of stuff about the books, and I was so disappointed. And I read the reviews of it on Amazon, and loads of other people felt the same, that it wasn't, felt that they wanted a biography. And I knew there was an official one coming out, but it seemed like it was going to be years away. And I just thought, I could write it. I could write it. I was amazed no one else had, and I just thought I could do it. I could do that. I could be the one to tell that story because I really want to. I want to know. I want to find out. I want to find out all this stuff. I want to put all this stuff together. So that's why I did it. And then it came about because I was a friend of mine put me in touch with a publisher who were looking for somebody to write a book about Tolkien, and I thought I'd pitch it just because. But I was like, there's so many books about Tolkien, and frankly, like you need a degree in Tolkien, you need a PhD in Tolkien to write about Tolkien. But I thought I'd pitch it, and then she came back to me with, "Oh, we've got this Tolkien expert to write about that book." And I was like, "Yeah, fine, I'd do that too." But she said, "We really like your writing. Is there anyone else you'd like to do? You'd be interested in writing about?" So I pitched them Terry Pratchett, and I did a bit of work on the first chapter. On the third chapter was the first one I did, which is called the journalist tale, and boom. And they commissioned it, so that's how it came about. And I think that's. I'm very proud of you, Mark. I'll be sharing the website later. Thanks, Mandy. That's my cousin. She's Mandy is a teacher and does far more worthwhile stuff than I do. But that I think is everything. So I reckon I'm going to leave it there unless anyone has any more questions. Oh, I sold another one. Thanks, guys. No more questions. Excellent. Hang on, I've just realised that the stream is like on a short delay, so I have to wait to see if there's any more questions. I'm going to assume there are no more questions, and that is perfect. Good, because we've been on the line for an hour and a bit. That went really quickly. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope lockdown is okay for you and you're safe. We've been really ill. Me and my wife have both been really sick the last week. Nick is just getting better, and we were in, it's been a really scary, horrible time. And I hope everybody is well. And it's been lovely to see you, and I hope you're as excited about this book as I am. Doug says, thanks, Mark, Nicoletta, and Princess. You're very well. Oh, it was Hannah that bought it. Bless her. Bless her. Thank you so much. Please do drop me a line on Twitter, 20th Century Mark, or leave comments. And
share the video.
Oh, and yes, please share this video. The video's on YouTube. You can just send it to people, drop it in Pratchett groups, share it, spread the word. That's always important. Spread the word as much as you can, because this is a small independent release, and if people don't hear about it, then no one's going to hear about it. So please do spread the word. You've all been brilliant. Thank you very much, and I will see you all soon.